Not relying on any false premises. I have some clarifications and questions, and I know how you support clarifications and asking questions, so let's get started.
Okay, I'm about to ask my first question. It's a very simple, direct, on-point question. Let's see if he can answer directly and on point.
Why do you cite, quote, and refer to the Constitution, court cases, due process, rules like Brady request and prosecutorial misconduct, and legal doctrines in your videos and court filings?
Well, I want to just make something clear, too, because I have a clarification, because I don't want to waste any more time than is necessary. Are you covering any new ground with this political issue argument? Or is it the same thing that we've already discussed before multiple times?
Now, I'll answer him. It's nothing we've discussed before, but if you notice, nothing in my question had to do with the political issue. It was a very straightforward, direct question. He's diverting and dodging from the topic. Let's see where he goes.
We have never discussed the political doctrine issue at all.
We've done that in text, so you're wrong about that. We have. And I've addressed the issue many times on my show. So are you raising the same issue? We did this on my forum. Are you raising the same issue that it's a political issue that you've raised in the past that we've discussed? Whether it's...
I've already told him no, but he just doesn't get it because he doesn't understand there's a difference between discussing political philosophy and discussing the political question doctrine. As anyone can see, looking up on the screen, the political question doctrine is not discussed. It's not even brought up anywhere. So what is being discussed is his approach to challenging the very concept of government himself. That's what he says they're doing. And I've told him that that's a political philosophy question. That's what this issue is about. This comment happened 2.5 years ago. I was blocked after making it. And I've only recently, this year, developed my political question doctrine research and argument. So it's an impossibility that he and I ever discussed it. But he continues with the diversion.
Audio or text?
Well, we've never texted, we've never audioed anything about the political question doctrine. So maybe we'll get to that tonight, maybe we won't. But I believe, reading the comments, I believe Misty has made you aware of the doctrine and quoted some cases regarding it. And
so the bottom line is, I don't have a bad memory, and I'm not lying. It's a matter of Stevens can't recognize a completely different issue if it hit him in the face. He has a very limited educational background, obviously, so he can't tell the difference between a philosophical argument and an argument about a legal doctrine.
This is information that I really have not gotten into with you at any point in time. So I don't think you could say it's my same old arguments because I've never had one on this issue with you.
You didn't discuss this with me on the forum before?
No.
Okay, well, I'll post screen caps of that in the video just because I don't think you're right there. But I've discussed this with you on the forum at length. I've even done videos on this and quoted you from the forum, and I've done that on the show. So I have addressed your issue before, and I know that Misty every week keeps, so it's not a new argument. And so if you don't think that you've argued it before, fine, I'll still address it.
He says it's not a new argument. How does he know? I've never had an argument or debate on the political question doctrine with him. So see, he's just either ignorant, stupid, or lying. One of the three.
So
okay.
Your question was...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Your question was, do I cite the Constitution and Due Process Clause on the show and in paperwork? Was that what you asked me?
No. I asked you, why do you cite, quote, and refer to Constitution, court cases, due process rules like Brady request, prosecutorial misconduct, and legal doctrines in your videos and court filings? Why do you do that?
To show that it's not only unfair according to basic principles of right and wrong, it's unfair even by their own rules.
So it's because these are rules that they have to follow. Is that correct?
Those are rules that they presumably are supposed to follow.
Okay, you notice, no direct answer. He's equivocating. It's rules they presumably. And you'll notice as we go along, he'll say generally and presumably. And that's why I said he didn't answer my questions. I think I said he didn't directly answer my questions or something to that effect. So that screen shot there is total a lie.
And you recognize that because you cite them. Okay. Do you agree that the legislative branch passes laws which say to whom they apply and how they are to be enforced?
I would agree with that generally, yes.
Okay. Do you agree that the executive branch enforces said laws?
That's presumably, yes. That's what they're supposed to do.
Do you agree that the legislative branch creates the foundation upon which a court's jurisdiction is based?
I believe that's part of it. I believe that they also base it off of the Constitution, which isn't necessarily written by a legislature.
Well, Mark, if a legislative body does not write a constitution, where does it come from? How does it appear? Does it just appear magically? So you're wrong there, Mark. It's by a legislative body.
Okay.
And I have another clarifying question, okay? And this.
Now you're about to see him go completely off topic into the realm of political philosophy and moral philosophy. Our subjects, we had 3 specific topics, and none of them involved philosophy. And political philosophy is when you question, is the government legitimate? Is it fair? Is it moral? All of those questions are political philosophy questions. And I think that's where he's going. Let's see. It's totally off topic and a diversion and dodging if he does.
This is something I've brought out in videos. So, do you believe that the government, the federal government, and the state and local governments, as they're supposed to operate under their constitutions, are legitimate moral organizations?
I am not here to discuss your views on political philosophy or the philosophy of moralities. I'm here to discuss what 90% of your output is, and that is people in traffic court at arraignment and how to deal with judges and such prosecutors. That's what this discussion is about, and that's what the topics you were informed of. So, given the facts that the legislative branch creates the foundation of the court's jurisdiction, given those facts, what evidence would prove that the legislative branch has, in fact, created the foundation of a court's jurisdiction?
Now that is a very important question. So let's see if he answers it directly or if he dodges it.
Well, I disagree with the premise of the question because the Constitution is what forms the basis of the court's jurisdiction, given that every, like Article 3, for example, in the federal Constitution. So,
we're not talking about federal courts or the federal Constitution. We're talking about arraignment at a traffic court, which is a lower court, and he's just kind of dodging and throwing up some irrelevant information here to kind of bamboozle all the listeners and his drones.
the court's jurisdiction is not always set. It's initially set by the judicial power section of the Constitution, and then there may be additional jurisdiction given as far as what the legislature does.
Well, he took the long way around it, but he finally agreed and admitted that the legislature does in fact create courts and establish their jurisdiction. And that was my question. What would be evidence of that? And if he's honest, he would say it's the law that passed by the legislature that's on the books that gave the court the jurisdiction. That's the honest answer. But he won't say it. Why won't he say it? Because it shows that his question that he tells people to ask, Your Honor, has the prosecutor presented any evidence of the court's jurisdiction? Well, now you know. We just answered that question. The evidence, like Stevens agrees, is the law that's passed by the legislature that gave the traffic court its jurisdiction.
But the thing is, when I am going into court, what you say is 90% of what we're talking about is we're pointing out that what they're doing is unfair and that the...
Well, he certainly dodged that question now, didn't he? Maybe he'll get back around to it.
The proceeding itself is unfair. And in that context, it is a relevant question as to...
So I guess what he's saying is that a traffic court hearing or proceeding is somehow unfair. I don't know where he gets that. He just says it, but he doesn't back it up with any evidence.
Whether the organization that we're talking about is a moral and ethical organization or it is not a moral and ethical organization, because I don't think it's fair, and maybe you'll agree with this, that if we're going to judge the fairness of an organization's actions, we can't just limit the analysis to just the rules of that organization. I mean, that would be like judging the mafia and whether they're a legitimate moral organization based on just their rules. So I don't think it's an irrelevant question. I think it goes right to the work that I do that you want to criticize here, which is fine. But I think that's an issue that is relevant and needs to be addressed. So
it's an issue of political philosophy, Mark, and I've told you that a bazillion times. And we're not discussing political philosophy in this debate. You agreed to the topics. He's just diverting. He's just throwing shit on the wall to see what sticks.
You need to answer, is the government, federal, state, and local, as constituted by their constitutions, are they moral and valid organizations?
Well, I'll tell you what, for a guy that makes a lot of videos and rants and raves about being accused of talking philosophy instead of law, here we are in a discussion about law, court decisions, and legal proceedings at a traffic court arraignment, and you're bringing in the philosophy of morality. We're not here to discuss philosophy. You're not here to discuss what you think, what you believe. I'm asking you about your process, what you do, what you talk about 90% of the time in your videos, and that's what I'm here for, and you were informed of that. So your philosophy of the morality of government and Lysander Spooner's, his ideas and those things, they're not relevant to this discussion. If you want to have a political philosophy discussion at a later date, we can do that. That's not what we are here for today. So I'll ask you once again, given the facts that the legislature creates the foundation of a court's jurisdiction at the state level, at the lower courts are created by the legislature, and those are traffic courts. Given those facts, what evidence would prove that the legislative branch has in fact created the foundation of a court's jurisdiction?
Well, first of all, I'm not ranting and raving, and you're the one who sounds like he's getting a bit irritated here. So maybe you're the one who's going to go apoplectic, to borrow the phrase from you. But let's get to I understood, and I know what the issues are. However...
Well, good. He finally admits it. Everybody hears it. He knows what the top subjects and topics are. He understood what they are, and he agreed to it. There's a witness to that fact and an email chain to back that up.
However, there are relevant issues that go to that point of jurisdiction. I'm not asking you a philosophical question. I'm asking you a matter of Are they a criminal organization? Basically, in plain English, are they a legitimate organization or are they a criminal organization? And that,
So he's asking me in basically plain English. Remember that phrase. But he says he's not asking me a philosophical question, and then turns right around and asks a philosophical question.
that you can't avoid that analysis or that answer and then be able to discuss whether what I'm doing in court and pointing out whether they're right and wrong and whether it's unfair or not. We can't discuss whether the proceedings are fair or unfair in the way I do things without first addressing whether they are a criminal organization or not. So you can throw out whether it's philosophy or okay, but that doesn't address the key issue here. We cannot have a discussion on whether the proceeding itself is fair if we're only going to examine the rules put out by that organization. So you can bail if you want, but this is a relevant part of the discussion. Is the government the one who are conducting these so-called trials and are creating these rules? Is it a legitimate moral institution, yes or no?
And for my third time, we're not here to discuss political philosophy. Political philosophy are questions about, is the government legitimate, moral, fair, all of that stuff. It has nothing to do with the topics he has been informed of and agreed to. He's just babbling about trying to get off topic. The honest answer that he's already admitted to and agreed to is evidence that a traffic court has jurisdiction is the law that was passed by the legislature creating that court and its jurisdiction. That's the honest, straight up answer. He dodges it. I think right about now I'm probably laughing my ass off because he cracks me up that he just dodges and then he turns around and says, I'm dodging or not answering.
Did he bail?
I'm not going to sit here and discuss your political philosophy or what is right and wrong. We're here to discuss the topics that you agreed to, and that is jurisdiction, prima facie, as it applies to the arraignment. And if we get to it, we'll get to the point of where asking whether the law applies just because you're in a physical location is a political issue or not. We can get to that later, but let's continue. Will you please answer the question on the subjects that we agreed to, and that is jurisdiction for one thing, and here it is. Given the facts that the legislature creates the lower courts like a traffic court and such, what evidence would prove that the legislative branch has in fact created the foundation of said court's jurisdiction?
Look, you're trying to mischaracterize it as talking about my political philosophy.
See how he dodged that question again? He's focusing on the form of my response being that he's focusing on, I'm saying it's his philosophy. No, I'm saying we're not here to discuss any philosophy, political, moral, or otherwise.
And I'm not doing that. I'm asking you for what you believe. Do you believe that it is an ethical organization so that we can then examine the rules that that organization is making so that we can come to have a rational adult discussion as to whether the proceedings in the traffic court are fair?
A rational, adult, intelligent conversation encompasses sticking to the topics of the discussion, which Stevens is not doing. He's trying to divert, he's trying to take attention away from the very pointed question I asked. And given that he has admitted and agreed that the legislature creates lower courts, well, what evidence is it that they have created the traffic court? And that's the law. That's the answer to his question that he asked everybody and has all his drones asking the judge. Where's the evidence of jurisdiction? The evidence of the court's jurisdiction is the law passed by the legislature.
So don't don't put it in terms of my political philosophy. I'm not asking you. I'm asking if you believe it is a moral and legitimate organization so that we can then have an intelligent discussion on the rules and the proceedings and if they're fair or not. Because that's what I talk about 90% of the time. So are you going to answer that so that we can proceed, or are you not going to do that? If you're going to refuse, I'll still participate with you. Okay, but you could just say, I'm not going to tell you what I think of the government as being moral or not. But don't couch it in terms that I'm asking for my political philosophy, because that's not what I'm doing. So yes or no, is it a moral institution, or are you going to refuse to answer the question?
I told you I'm not here to discuss political philosophy of any kind, nor any type of philosophy on morality. I'm here to discuss the procedures of court that you talk about, the things that you file, what you do, how you tell people to do things, the type of paperwork you give them to file in court, the things you tell them to say in court.
Oh, as a sidebar, I don't look anything like that.
The things you tell them that are true about the proceedings. I'm here to discuss those things. You know that. You agreed to it. Let's move on.
Now, you have to know that is what underlies what I'm doing. The reason why we're doing.
Bringing up a total irrelevant thing. I gave a very pointed question to the topics that we are discussing, but he doesn't want to answer that question. He's dodging it by bringing up this irrelevant stuff.
It is to point out it's not fair, not necessarily and only because of their rules, but by basic principles of right and wrong. What the Supreme Court would say, traditional notions of fair play and substantial justice.
Well, then, Stevens, if you think the Supreme Court has somehow ruled or held that a traffic ticket proceeding in a traffic court is somehow unfair, violates due process, you're going to have to bring that up instead of just putting on the screen some irrelevant quote or statement from somewhere. You're going to have to come up with some actual evidence that says that a traffic ticket proceeding in a traffic court is unfair and violates due process.
So it's kind of disingenuous of you to not answer the question when I'm just asking you a basic question, because even the Supreme Court talks about basic principles of justice, and it was the international shoe case. So don't go throwing this whole thing about philosophy. That's just a way of dodging the question. So you want to dodge a question? Fine. I'm used to you doing that. We'll get to the rest of the discussion.
Good. Let's move on. Given the facts that the legislature creates the lower courts and creates their foundation of their jurisdiction, what evidence would prove that the legislative branch has in fact created the foundation of a court's jurisdiction?
Well, the evidence is, because I just told you, it still comes and is still entirely based on let's say for the federal court, it would be Article 3, the judicial.
And again, Mark, you're bringing up the federal Article 3 courts. We're not talking about an Article 3 federal court. We're talking about an inferior court, a traffic court, and the traffic court only exists because the legislature has passed a law creating it. So evidence that a traffic court has jurisdiction is that law that the legislature passed. You've already said twice that the legislature passes laws and creates courts. You've already said that. So why are you dodging this question and bringing up a total irrelevant subject? Why are you dodging?
Power, the granted judicial power, and then the power of the legislature to then create other courts is still.
There, he just said it again. The power of the legislature to create other courts. And that's what they've done with traffic courts. They've passed a law creating the jurisdiction of a traffic court. Therefore, the answer to the question, what evidence is there the court has jurisdiction? The evidence of it is the law passed by the legislature. Very simple. But he won't say that because it blows his gimmick question out of the water.
Still based on the Constitution, is it not?
Okay, thank you. So the deal is the jurisdiction that the court refers to when you ask it if there's evidence of jurisdiction is this jurisdiction we're talking about that has been authorized by the legislature, which represents the overwhelming power of the sovereign. Now, evidence of this jurisdiction is the fact that there is a law granting the court the ability to hear legal disputes, cases of controversy, for instance. That's why the judge always refers to the law as evidence when asked if a jurisdictional question.
There, I've answered the question myself. And that's the answer that a judge will give, a prosecutor, any attorney will give you when you ask them, what evidence is there that this court has jurisdiction? It's the law. So there's the answer that Stevens dodged and equivocated on. Okay, since Stevens couldn't tell the difference between the issues of political philosophy and the political question doctrine, and to address his questions, he kept asking about my beliefs of whether the government is legitimate, fair, or moral, and I kept telling him those are political philosophy questions. And our topics that we were to discuss did not include any discussions on any type of philosophy. But I wanted Stevens and all his little drones who've been commenting on my videos, I wanted them to know what questions and issues are based in political philosophy. And political philosophy, also known as political theory, is the study of topics such as politics, liberty, justice, property, rights, law, and the enforcement of laws by authority. And the questions that are pondered are, what are they? If they are needed, what makes a government legitimate? What rights and freedoms it should protect? What form it should take? What the law is, and what duties citizens owe to a legitimate government, if any, and when it may be legitimately overthrown, if ever. So when Stevens asked me what my beliefs are as about the legitimacy of government or the morality of government, he's asking a philosophical question, a political philosophical question. What he believes and what he thinks notwithstanding. So there, everybody now knows what political philosophy is and should be able to readily identify a political philosophy question when it's asked, such as the ones Stevens was asking me. So that's the end of part one of the correct interpretation of what went on between the discussion between me and Marc Stevens. So stay tuned for part two. And be sure and hit that like button and subscribe. Thank you.